Most of the time when I was going through my different degree programs, I was one of one or two, maybe three female composers in the program. So very male dominated when I was there. I tell my students about this too. For many, many years, I used a pseudonym that was a male name. It also makes it that much harder to get a performance by an orchestra. So it's a big feat to, have that happen. I mean, because that's tens of thousands of dollars to, for them to spend to make that happen. How does contemporary music communicate? People talk about a composer having a voice, and I'm not sure I know what that means exactly. If I do have a voice, it's variable. And now that I teach it, I understand there to be a lot more technique, like there would be with a performing on an instrument. There's an awful lot of technique that you can teach. It's a little late, but I'm learning a lot about composing now. Sorry, it looks like my poodle is going to join us. Say hello. There we go.
Hi everyone. Before we start, I would like to ask you to do something that's really quick and really easy. It will literally just take a second, and that is to hit the subscribe button. This will make sure that the algorithm shows these videos to more people. If you've been enjoying the Who's Heard podcast, do also consider liking the videos, leaving a comment or a rating. Anything helps to invite more people in to join the conversation and to get the stories of my incredible interviewees heard. Now, on with the video. Dr. Sarah Bassingthwaighte is a Canadian-American composer, flautist and educator who has collected accolades all across the globe. Her music has been performed by some of the most noteworthy orchestras, including the London Symphony Orchestra, that recently recorded a CD of her music, which is forthcoming. Sarah served as a faculty member in many educational institutions, including the University of Washington, Seattle University, and the Rachmaninoff Institute in Tambov, Russia. This video was recorded online. There is unfortunately some background noise in Sarah's audio track. Still, we hope you will enjoy this powerfully insightful conversation. Hi, Sarah. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. It's wonderful to see you and meet you finally.
Well, I'm super excited to get to talk to you today. You are a very busy composer on top of being a very accomplished composer.
Yeah, it's been busy.
Having won numerous competitions, commissioning works, and also performing as a flautist quite a lot.
Yeah. I think life as a musician tends to be really busy because a lot of us wear many hats.
What I would love for us to do, sort of at the beginning of our conversation, is go back to your roots. Where did your musical journey begin? Do you remember your first music lesson, and how did you find to both flute and performance?
Let me see. I was born in Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic, and my parents both came from University of Toronto, and they had just moved over to Minnesota. And so I started piano lessons there, and I was really young, which a lot of people are when they start piano lessons. So I was about 4. Sorry, it looks like my poodle is going to join us. Say hello. There we go. uh, and so I remember it was pretty funny. When I was 5 years old, I composed my first piece, and I was so proud of it. And it was this cute little waltz. And I found out many years later that I didn't compose it. I just remembered it. It was somebody else's piece entirely. But maybe that moment sort of solidified my idea that I could be a composer. So that was pretty fun. And then I ended up starting flute when I was 9 years old. And it's wonderful, like all the youth symphonies and festivals, all these opportunities. I think they make an enormous difference for young, players. And so I participated in all of those and just grew to love music more and more through time. And then I ended up finally at Indiana University, and that's where I really took up composing and studied with Margaret Brower. Harvey Solberger was there, and I spent some time with him there also.
You did your undergrad in Bloomington, is that correct?
Mhm. Yes, I did.
Going back to when when you grew up sort of with music around you? Were your parents particularly musical? Did they actively encourage you to pursue either performance or composition?
Yeah, they were very, very supportive. We had a, grand piano in the house, and everybody played something in the house. So we heard music all the time. My dad would run over and play Chopin, and we would sing. I feel like I was surrounded by music a lot. There were a lot of my family. I actually didn't know this so much when I was young, but a lot of my family that's all over the world, in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Montreal. It turned out they were all professional musicians. And when I was young, I didn't know that. I hadn't met them. And one of my uncle, George Bassingthwaighte, was a very accomplished composer in Canada, but I didn't know that until I was older. Like, oh, that's really amazing. And he studied with Nadia Boulanger and many other amazing composers. And like, oh, so there must be something in the gene pool. I don't know.
Yeah, somehow a familial connection. That's incredible. Did you ever talk to your uncle though about it?
No, and I'm so disappointed because I didn't know this. He died young, and so I didn't know it till after he died. I have all of his music now. I have the scores, and that's wonderful to have that connection, but I didn't get to discuss it with him.
Still, you're carrying on the family legacy, I suppose.
I suppose so, yeah. Yeah.
So in Bloomington, what was it like studying composition? Was that a bit of a shift for you, sort of this more concentrated focus on composition now, or had you already been preparing for that leading up to university?
I hadn't taken composition lessons before that, and that's a good question. When I think about my composition studies in my undergrad and my master's and then my doctorate, strangely, I don't remember very much about the details of the lessons. I feel like they were more intuitive and more responsive to what I was working on and less technical, maybe. And so a lot of listen to other composers, see what they're doing, try to understand what they're doing. But now I teach composition and I'm at the head of composition at my university. And now that I teach it, I understand there to be a lot more technique like there would be with a performing on an instrument. There is an awful lot of technique that you can teach. And I think maybe I was in my undergrad in the 80s. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the pedagogy at the time wasn't quite as technical as it is now. In terms of teaching form, different rhythmic approaches, melody, harmony, all of those things. Now I feel like they're very, very clear, distinct, systematic, but that's not the education that I got when I was there.
Do you mean also systematic in terms of presumably modern composition techniques? So we're not talking about historical methods of, I don't know, writing chorale, but modern styles. You can presumably still teach the basic techniques of all of them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And as I hear myself speak, I'm thinking that when I was in the undergrad, a lot of the teaching actually came through the theory and the history teaching rather than explicitly in the lessons. And so we did learn how Bach composed, how Beethoven composed, Brahms, etc., on through the ages. So the information was definitely there. And yes, and then on to 20th century techniques, and then Bartok and Stravinsky and Schoenberg and etc. So I think that the education was extremely thorough. It just wasn't quite the same methodology as now. I think that for me, now that I'm teaching, I'm learning a lot about composition that I didn't know quite so clearly in the past. I'm much more clear about how to create form, how to utilize all the compositional tools fully, much more than I was a long time ago. So it's a little late, but I'm learning a lot about composing now.
You're on a lifelong journey of learning, as we all are.
Yeah.
I looked at some of your publications, and one of them, I unfortunately wasn't able to access it before speaking to you now. The flute meets machine, but from what I read about it, it sounded a little bit like a modern era Quantz, sort of, like in the 18th century we had the Versuch, eine Anweisung, die Flöte traversiere zu spielen, like a treatise on how to play the flute. And this sounds a bit
Great.
like how to play the flute with electronics.
Yeah, yeah, that's so funny. I never would have made the comparison with the Quants, but of course that Quants book is legendary. And Yeah, Flute Meets Machine is a really fun book that it first covers sort of the history of electroacoustic music in general, which started with flute, which is kind of cool, with autolining and all of that. And and yeah, and then how to perform and compose electroacoustic music, including flute. And I wrote that in 2000, I think. And so the technology from then to now has developed a lot, of course. So even then, though, I had an index of all the electroacoustic pieces for flute and electronics, and it was more than 2,000 pieces even then, which is amazing. That's really amazing. I find, that's a lot of pieces. And recently, I've started writing using Ableton, and as some people are using Max and Kima, some other programs like that. And so the composing for flute and electronics is developing quite a bit. And I just yesterday got back from the Electronic Music Festival in Kansas City, and hearing what these young composers are doing with the electronics is stunning. Stunning. Just really cool music up and coming.
Do you consider yourself an electroacoustic composer, or I mean, you write not exclusively electroacoustic. I listened to some of your analog pieces, if you will. How would you describe your composition style?
Right. So I mostly don't write electroacoustic, but I do still write some electroacoustic. And one of my pieces was played there, and then another piece was just premiered last night. So for flute and electronics. So that's nice, and I love it. I think it's fascinating. But I actually mostly write for chamber orchestra and orchestra. So I have lots and lots of flute music since I play flute, and that's feels very natural for me. But I also have written lots of chamber music works. I'd say maybe 30 different chamber music works, and then full symphony works is probably around five now. And next week, I have an album coming out of my orchestral works performed by the London Symphony. So I'm very excited about that. It's going to be really great. And I love writing for a full symphony. So and the music I write is different than the music I write for electroacoustic pieces. Um, which is kind of interesting because people talk about a composer having a voice, and I'm not sure I know what that means exactly. If I do have a voice, it's variable, because the electroacoustic pieces are very different, kind of wild, very some people might not consider it music. And then the orchestral stuff, it verges on like post-romantic styling sometimes, and then everything in between. So some of the chamber music, I have one being premiered in a few weeks, and it's between the two. So it has some extended techniques, some improvisation incorporated into the score, unusual instruments like electric harp and a music box and things like that. So sort of runs the gamut, and um, uh, just sort of exploring what I think is interesting to me. So I wouldn't say I feel like I have a voice or a style exactly, but I'm interested in a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, just alone from what I listened to, the stylistically, a lot of the pieces were very diverse, which is beautiful. Also in terms of mood and virtuosity, some of the flute pieces I listened to were incredibly virtuosic. And then another one, the I think Compassion for solo piano, which you sent me, was extremely serene and meditative. I mean, it speaks to your quality as a composer that you have this kind of breadth, really.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Thank you.
I I would love to ask you, and obviously you don't need to answer, or you can tell me that I'm absolutely wrong as well, which is fine. But obviously, like I've gotten to talk to quite a few women composers who studied in the 80s or 70s or 90s even, and for a lot of them, they definitely experience struggles, pushbacks, or for some of them, their career sort of started later in a way because of either societal reasons or personal reasons, care responsibilities, whatever happens. Did you experience any of that? I mean, you're incredibly accomplished now and probably have been for a while, but how was that journey getting here?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that. Let me see if I can answer it well. Yes, I definitely felt that for sure. And most of the time when I was going through my different degree programs, I was one of one or two, maybe three female composers in the program. So very male dominated when I was there. I I do see it where I am now, that's different. It's like more like half and half. I don't know if that's true most places or not. So yes, I definitely felt that. And I tell my students about this too. For many, many years, I used a pseudonym that was a male name. And I'm not proud of that, but it was it seemed to be the right thing to do because I definitely had the feeling when I was younger that it would be dismissed out of hand. It's when I was in schools not long after Copeland made the famous statement that women couldn't feel music deeply and couldn't make good composers. And so that was definitely part of the culture, I think. And it has changed a lot, thank goodness. And really incredible music has, there it is. And it's always been there too, of course, we know that. There have been incredible female composers through the centuries. We just didn't necessarily get taught about them. And it's so wonderful to go back and listen to those. And like Lily Boulanger is one of them. She's like, I can't believe I didn't know about this. It's incredible, incredible music. So now I don't know that I feel that now so much as a living composer. I think we still have a struggle to get people to take us seriously sometimes. Pieces haven't necessarily stood the test of time in the eyes of the average audience, maybe. But I'm not sure that, I mean, I think I feel a twinge of, as being a female composer now, there is a little bit of being taken a little less seriously. I don't know how other people feel. That would be interesting. And I'm sure you're hearing a lot about how people feel differently about it. But yeah, and I'll have to think about that a little bit more. But it has definitely affected what I've done. And now thinking back on it, I think people also had an idea that music written by women would be a certain type of music, that there are things it couldn't be, that they considered masculine. And I think that has not borne out. Women can compose whatever. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating history, and glad that you're talking to people about this because we are at a place where it's changing.
Yeah, I think we still have ways to go, but I do believe it's changing, and there are so many women composers. But the thing is, they, as you said, they have been there throughout history. This isn't about me, but my background is also in historical musicology here at Oxford. My degree is on the 18th century women in music. And there have been so many of them, but somehow people have found reasons not to include them in music history or not to take their work seriously and validate it for what it was worth and what it did. So I would be loath for that to happen again today.
Good point that we don't know how this is going to play out in the future. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Going back to your synonym, I find it fascinating that you use that. And to be honest, it was probably a really smart thing to do at the time. But what was the process for you to stop using it? When did it happen, and how did you make that decision?
It was a gradual change. But I think over the last 15 years, there definitely been calls for women composers. So there's that I would, be responding to calls for scores with my name. And I think actually in between the two things, I would just put my first initial. And so that was sort of a transition, like, so my name would be on there, but they wouldn't know I was female. Yeah. So, but I'm not sure. I think it has been maybe since, Me Too movement, definitely much more outreach to women composers and welcoming and a lot more programming. And also at the same time, my career itself had advanced. I was getting commissions. And so in that case, I would want to use my name, but they commissioned me. So I think all of the things happened at the same time, sort of, you know, that my name got to be better known and people are looking for female composers now and not non-binary as well.
You mentioned before that sometimes the composers, regardless of gender, probably nowadays struggle because their pieces might not stand the test of time, or I guess The most difficult performance is the most difficult one to get is always the second one, because everyone wants to do a world premiere, but then can you get it to a second performance? Do you ever think about sort of the longevity of your pieces when you're writing them, either for the second performance, but possibly also for what about 100 years from now? How do you want people to approach your compositions?
Yeah, it's actually it's a hard question to answer. I have not thought a lot about longevity. What will happen in the future. I don't know. I don't know what'll happen. I don't even know what's going to happen in my own lifetime. I'm curious to see if my music will keep being played. I kind of feel like the flute music will. It feels to me like my flute music is very solidly a part of the flute repertoire now. And I know a lot about the history of the flute repertoire, and I feel like it's in there now. Some of it, some of it. So that's kind of interesting. It's also not the music that I feel like expresses me the most deeply, the flute music. I think because it's smaller ensembles typically. So I would be interested in some of the bigger pieces, the orchestral pieces, having a longer lifespan. But I'm not sure what'll happen with that. I feel like actually I'm right on the precipice of seeing what'll happen more with my orchestral music, especially with the release of this album and hopefully getting second performances. Because it is hard. You have to sort of break a threshold where people actually know your name, and are looking to see what you have written, right? They have to be able to find you for that to happen. So I am curious to see what will happen next, and whether I can keep getting commissions for orchestral works and then gain some momentum that way. I think that'll be really interesting. I don't know though how to answer like sort of the longer question. I'm not personally like super invested in my name living beyond my lifetime. That isn't that it hasn't been a big concern of mine. It sounds nice, you know. Uh, and it would be nice. I think it would be nice, like what you're talking about historically, if women were to disappear from the history, then, we have to keep regenerating the momentum. It would be really nice if it was just part of the literature. And so the next generation of female composers, like, okay, you know, we are composers. But so far, it's felt like every generation of female composers has to fight the battle again and to be taken seriously, to be admitted to programs. So it would be nice if there was just a general momentum that would stay. I think there's good momentum at the moment in some ways with some groups. We know that a lot of the major orchestras still do very little programming of music by female composers, especially in terms of minutes. Like when they program a female composer, it's often the overture that's 5 minutes, and then the rest of the 75 minutes is all men.
It's more of a performative sort of tick box exercise, and often it's not even a really representative piece of that woman that they are scheduling.
They're not even doing a good service to that composer. Yes, so you're right. There's a lot left to be done, gaining momentum, and I think some people are being very vocal about it, and that's helping. But I did see some statistics recently about some of the major orchestras, and it's still some program zero female composers still, and most of them program a little. And often it's like on the children's concerts or the what too. So it's not on the main concerts often.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder about that. I think Donna UK, the organization, also published similar statistics recently, or maybe those were the ones you saw. I think anecdotally there are more people nowadays who are aware of works by women being composed, being performed, and more women conductors taking center stage, and so on and so on. But it's only anecdotal, and then the overall numbers still are not anywhere near matching those of the male colleagues. But because people have this anecdotal awareness, they think like, oh, a lot is being done. We shouldn't complain anymore.
Right. No, I think you're right. And I was falling into that a little bit too, because I feel it's on my mind every day. So it feels like it's permeating the culture more than it is, because I do think about it every single day.
I also wanted to ask you about, so I read one of your reviews and it was really beautiful. It said something like, how your music communicates the message of contemporary pieces or something along those lines. What are the messages that you are wanting your music to communicate?
Yeah, that's great. I think you're talking about the Pan Magazine Carla Reese reviews, what that sounds like. Well, let me think. I feel like there's two different aspects to that question. One is how does contemporary music communicate? Communicating through music in contemporary music, contemporary aesthetics, I guess, is one question. And then topics. What topics? Because I do feel like music does have it does communicate current social, environmental, political concerns. Those can be part of music, and they are for me. So I have performed, I have programmed, and I've composed music that has a message to say about immigration, about climate change, about the social issues, about the role of technology in our life. You know, all of these things. And for me, I feel like music's a wonderful place to do that because we can program a concert, for example, that shows how, you know, all of these composers through the centuries were exiled from their homeland, or there's these issues are, you know, they go throughout history, and we can show that, and it's often composers that we already knew, we didn't know that they'd been exiled or whatever. So I think those are interesting for programming, interesting for composing. And then I have some pieces that are explicitly about climate change. I tend to write a lot about nature. You know, I live in Seattle, it's gorgeous, there's mountains behind me, you know, and I love it. And so I would say a solid 80% of my pieces are about some aspect of nature, and some of them are about climate change and my feelings of concern about that. Like one of them I called Weather Smoke, because one day as I was composing, I opened up the weather app on my phone and it said the weather that day was smoke. I was like, oh, is that where we are? That's like, it's part of the app because it's common enough that it's on there. I was just shocked, you know. And I live in Seattle. I've lived in Seattle for a long, long time, and that never happened when I was young. Never. I never remember that at all. And now we have a season now, people jokingly called smoke. That's like August, September, and it's just terribly sad. So that's important to me. I'm also part of a group called Earth Creative, where it's a collection of artists of all genres that are doing work around climate change and trying to send a message out. And I think we're in like 22 different countries now. Really cool groups, really nice. And then the other aspect that you was talking about was, and this might address why people are afraid of new music sometimes. Does it communicate? Is it weird? You know, is it just atonal, something that is intellectualized and abstract and all that? And so I feel like for me, it feels extremely expressive, and it feels very personal and feels very emotional. That's the music I'm composing. It does not feel abstract at all. And I feel it very, very deeply. So when I perform also, but when I compose, I feel a sense of motion, of energy, of, you know, color, just all of these things that are very, very personal and immediate. And I think that matters because if people are going to go, they've never heard of me, they're going to go to a concert that has, you know, my music on it. I can say, I think that it will be very engaging because I think it speaks to something that is universal in all humans, all living creatures, and isn't an abstract idea of like a thing you could do with music. You know, it's me expressing what I want to express, and I think that's also why I'm able to write in what seems like different genres, is because it doesn't require a genre to be expressive. Every genre can be expressive as long as it's coming from an expressive place. And I feel that that's where I feel the absolute most comfortable, is if I'm composing something or performing something and it feels really like it comes from deep inside me. And that could be a lot of things. It could be a way of moving, it could be emotions, it could be happy, sad, contemplative, whatever it might be.
I love that you're thinking about sort of how people who might be afraid of new music, and I think there are a lot of people who are how they can engage and connect with this kind of music. What I often hear is sort of like, oh, I don't like music that has no melody, which I think is an unfair assessment of new music, and also what is a melody. Another thing I was wondering about is, as a performer, obviously you don't only play your own music. I don't know if you commission new pieces as well as a flautist, but what are you looking for in something you would consider a good quote unquote composition of contemporary music?
Yeah, that's a fun question because it flips it a little bit. So as a performer, and it's true, like as a performer and a composer, they inform each other quite a bit. And so when I'm composing, I definitely think about who is going to play this, what it feels like for them to pick up the instrument and do what I just wrote. And okay, so as a performer, I mean, I guess I like to play things that are fun, you know, and but expressive. Basically, is it expressive? I personally am a fan of music that has a sense of motion and direction, tension and release. It doesn't have to have a melody for me because a melody it can, great. But there's so many other musical tools that are very, very interesting. You know, there's so many things you can do with rhythm and meter and texture and timbre and dynamics and articulation and interesting things with form, all of that. And so, yeah, I think people are maybe think a lot about melody, but there's so much else that's interesting. And honestly, I think that a lot of times when people love a piece, they think they love it because of the melody, but it might not actually be because of the melody. It's probably because the other things are there and they're part of it. And so I think it's just that it's the most obvious thing, you know, to that we hear, but we love, like, even if it's a rock song or something, you know, what the drums are doing, what's the bass doing, all that. It's an integral part of the piece. We just don't necessarily realize, but if you took them out, you'd certainly realize. Yeah, so yes, I commission pieces. I've commissioned, I think, over 30 now for myself, and then also many I run in my history. I've run a couple of chamber orchestras and have one right now, and we commission constantly. You know, so through those orchestras, I think now it's probably over 60 pieces for chamber orchestra or a subgroup within that. So many. And in fact, I just finished a composition competition for young composers, international competition, and we received 157 entries from, what was it, 27 different countries or something like that. Really interesting. And everybody was 26 or under. A lot of them were like 16 years old. The really interesting thing about doing that is these pieces are amazing. I was so blown away by what the young composers are doing, and it's very, very different from when I was that age. They just seem so sophisticated and very thoughtful, very thorough consideration of different musical elements in their pieces. They're just really smart. And also, I've talked to a bunch of them also, and they also have a strong sense of the history. They know about medieval music. You know, they can track it. So I'm pretty impressed with what's coming. I think it'll be very interesting. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that's a complete answer to that question. Anyway, I love performing new music. I pretty much only perform new music now. And some of it's tonal, some of it's not tonal. That's not really my criteria. If it's expressive in a way that speaks to me now, that's great, you know. And so that could be any number of different styles and aesthetics within that.
Yeah. The other thing I'm curious about, especially because you're head of the composition department in your university, and you're very much also in the higher education teaching space for composition. And in recent years, at least here in the UK, there have been a lot of debates going on about what should students have to learn, especially in terms of the dominance of the Western classical tradition. What is your approach to this topic? What do you think should or shouldn't be core curriculum?
It is tricky because it's a big question. We're talking about music from different traditions. talking about cross genre. So, and it's a tricky answer because there's limited time at a university also. I feel like at my school, which is Seattle Pacific University, they have sometimes done a really, really great job of including courses on, you know, Indian ragas, on music of whatever, just all over the world. There's like a spice route class. There's, a lot of very interesting classes. And then in my own personal teaching, I feel like my experience is that there's still when they're teaching theory, it's very limited. It still tends to be the European or Western music theory. And for the whole theory sequence, there's very little consideration for other theoretical approaches. And so in the private lessons, I do try to go beyond that. Even yesterday, I was talking to my comp lab, and we are talking about cultures in which the interval of a major second was considered a resting place, which it is not in Western music. And played a few examples like whoa, and polytonalism, and polyrhythm stuff is really interesting, and a lot of different cultures use a lot of polyrhythms that aren't used in Western music. And so I do really love to spend time on those things. Another way to approach it is just when you're talking about musical materials, just talk about the things you could do. And so I definitely, like harmonically, try to include harmonic approaches that are not just, tonic, subdominant, dominant, that kind of thing, and go much beyond that. But it's just hard to have time for everything. And I feel like we can just we can touch on it a little bit, give some examples, say go listen to this, and that's great. That's really, really helpful. I would love if we could expand the theory teaching a little bit, because I think we could. I think that students would love it. Like when I teach, like jazz harmony as well, and the students, they're composing. So most of my students right now are not composing in a Western tradition. They are composing film scoring. They're composing video game scoring. They're composing songwriting. They're almost none of them are in a regular Western classical tradition. And I think that's a reality that maybe the theory program hasn't caught up with. And this, the idea of not having enough time, I think, is a problem with a lot of what we're talking about. One reason maybe women aren't getting programmed on, orchestral concerts is, conductors and programmers don't have time to go find them. I mean, I think they think that. Yeah.
Time and money, probably.
Yeah, and they just don't know where they are. It's going to take time to go research, go listen, find out what they are, and it's just hard to do. And the other ones they already know. And so I think that that is a major obstacle. I know there are becoming databases. There's a really wonderful one called Anna's Composer Database, and she tries to make it as easy as possible to find what you're looking for. What's the instrumentation? What's the length? Is it minority composer, female, non-binary? What are you looking for? And just has the database for all this. So I think we're trying to make it easier for people to find them. But I think in case, time is a real time, and habit and all that are things that are hard to overcome.
I think you're absolutely right, and especially also with the programming of lesser known composers, whether that's historical or contemporary composers, there's an issue of time, but I assume also in a way status, and especially if you're doing big symphony orchestra pieces, that costs a lot of money, and it's just more. It takes more resources of all different kinds to organize that and put that together. I am wondering sometimes for myself, and I'd be curious to know what you think about it. Or at least I perceive it as a kind of status symbol for composers, especially nowadays, to write symphonic music. I mean, you yourself said you feel you can express yourself best through orchestral music. I hope I'm paraphrasing you correctly.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say but, and I think there's also a kind of status attached to it. Now, I'm not accusing you of seeing it that way, but I think the audience often perceives it that way. If a piece of a composer is performed and it's a big orchestral piece, then they probably think like, oh, they must really believe in that composer to invest all that time and money.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it quite like that. But you're right. I definitely have that response from people. I wonder if it's partly because if you ask the average non-musician what classical music groups they know, it's pretty much usually an orchestra, a few soloists, here and there. So maybe that's part of it is that they just simply don't know about chamber music as much. There's definitely string quartets and soloists and all that. So maybe that's part of it. My interest in the symphony orchestra is that it's just this incredible menu of instruments to choose from. It's so fun. Yeah, but the status thing, it's I guess I just hadn't thought of it quite like that, but I am definitely getting that kind of response when I talk about my orchestral pieces versus talking about my chamber pieces. And the response to my pieces does not, it's a mismatch with the ones I'm proud of. The ones that I feel like I worked really hard and I really achieved what I was trying to do, those aren't the ones that are getting the most attention for whatever that's worth. But and I think a lot of composers must have that kind of response. Yeah, I'm not sure. It would be interesting to find out from non-musicians well, what they think about that.
I mean, I haven't studied this question in particular, but I imagine it is probably tied to sort of the monetary expenses attached to symphony orchestras. At least part of it must be that, because we live in a society that values things that cost a lot of money.
You go. It's a thing you can measure. Yeah. No, yeah, you're exactly right. And it also makes it that much harder to get a performance by an orchestra. So it's a big feat to, have that happen. So that makes sense. I mean, because that's tens of thousands of dollars for them to spend to make that happen. Yeah, yeah, good. That's a good point. I actually hadn't thought of it that way.
Well, I'm conscious of the end of our time slowly approaching, or not so slowly, unfortunately. But I thought maybe we could finish our conversation with a kind of lightning round, quickfire questions, if you're up for that.
Sure, let's go for it.
So, what is your favorite composition that you've ever written?
Oh, oh boy. I'm going to say it's one that I just wrote. It's called Cape Flattery, and it's a sort of an overture or a symphonic poem, somewhere between the two, for full orchestra.
What's the piece where you've gotten the best audience response?
I just had my piece Iridium played this a couple of days ago, and great audience response. I was really surprised. It's a crazy piece for two flutes and electronics, surround sound, subwoofers, the whole bit, and I wasn't sure how it would be received because it's crazy. And yeah, and people really responded to it and found it very dynamic and interesting and engaging and electronic sounds that included like industrial whirs and um, yeah, like clangs and all these like crazy sounds, and along with the flutes doing an incredibly intricate like digga 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 digga, but trading off between the two flutes against the pulsing in the electronics. It's just kind of interesting. So that was really fun.
Amazing. And what is still on your compositional bucket list, so to say, either in terms of genre or in terms of orchestras you want to work with?
I would love to write more orchestral pieces. I feel like every time I do, I get better at it. And I will. I have a cool residency coming up in July where I'm going to be on a boat in Svalbard for the Arctic residency. And two projects will come out of that. One is going to be a multimedia, like electronics video kind of project. And the other one will be a full symphonic work that will be, you know, recorded and all that. So that'll be really fun. And both of them will have a climate angle on that.
Last but not least, where would you like to see contemporary composition go in the future, in the near or distant future? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, good, great, a great question. I think I would say I would love it to reach more and more people. My experience is that new music can and often is really approachable, really expressive, really interesting, and that a lot of people just don't know it even exists outside of the classical music community. And I think that People would love it, especially I think there's been more and more cross-pollination with other genres, and so contemporary classical music is different than what I think a lot of people think it is. And so I would love to see it just get bigger and bigger and more people enjoy it and go to concerts and love going to concerts. I think that'd be really fun.
I hope so as well. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you about your music, composition, the classical music world in general. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the really great, thoughtful questions. And yeah, I've had a really good time too. So thank you.
Thank you.